Exercise 1. If you are unaware of your personality preferences, for example, you have received conflicting results on personality assessments that you've taken more than once, in all likelihood, this lack of awareness is occurring because your identity is unintentionally hiding your personality to some degree. Sometime during your growing up years, you probably got the message from someone important to you that it wasn't acceptable to behave, believe, and/or belong in sync with your personality. Or maybe you were taught that the personality preference opposite to yours was superior. Or your family members simply had different personalities than yours, and so you thought that the behaviors, beliefs, and belongings associated with their personalities were the right ones to have. And now, for whatever reason, and perhaps without knowing it, you are living your life in sync with someone else's personality preferences rather than your own. This personality masking probably didn't occur deliberately, but the result is the same. Someone else, not your true self, has determined the path that your life is taking. Exercise 2. Most people will agree that it is wrong to subject another sentient being to pain, distress, frustration, mental suffering, and death. However, most will also agree that there are exceptions to this very general rule. The first one is that we sometimes have to subject someone to suffering to help them, even though we cannot explain this to them. That is typically the situation when we take our family animals and even our small children to the clinic to get them vaccinated. Yet, as it is something that is done to benefit the animal or child in question, very few would find this wrong. The other exception is when the expected end results seem to justify us doing it. Modern warfare notoriously creates collateral damage, civilians hurt or killed by the conflict even though they have nothing to do with it. The justification does not remove the sadness and the tragedy, but many will still find it justified to, under certain conditions, enter into armed conflict to protect democratic societies. Exercise 3. Imagine that a Spanish-speaking tourist is detained at a Canadian airport security checkpoint, for he looks a bit suspicious to the agent, and the agent doesn't speak Spanish. Somehow, a background of common knowledge pervades the scene. A massively fatal airline crash occurred less than a month ago. It happened 1,000 miles away, to be sure. But baggage is examined more thoroughly now than it was a month ago, and no one complains. The Spanish-speaking tourist seems to accept the terms of the drama, for he too is aware of the famous crash under suspicious circumstances. In this way, and in millions of other little episodes enacted in airports around the world, the dramatic force of a remote event is brought to bear on countless lives. In time, this singular event will cease to be a force in the conscious lives of the population, but it will gradually be assimilated into a general understanding about air travel, perhaps making some incremental difference in regulations adopted here and there. Air travelers, conscious of the recent airline crash, would accept the enhanced security measures, and with time the influence of the event would be incorporated in people's lives, bringing additions in regulations. Exercise 4. Across the globe, the demand for sports psychology continues to grow. As teams and individuals constantly strive to find the winning edge, it becomes increasingly likely that a sports psychologist will be involved to help find that edge. However, these powerful market forces can be dangerous, especially when demand has the potential to outstrip supply. In these circumstances, caution must be exercised in both promoting and developing the subject. To many athletes and coaches, professional sports psychologists may already be viewed with a degree of suspicion because of previous negative experiences or stereotypical images. For example, consultants may have failed to deliver the goods which they over-optimistically promised, or have packaged their services in such a way that clients had been turned off. Certainly, sports psychologists have often been regarded with suspicion by the media, at worst characterized as Svengali-like puppet masters who attempt to pull the athlete's strings with one goal in mind, performance enhancement, at whatever price and with little regard to the sensitivities or wishes of the individual or team concerned. Exercises 5 through 7. At 5:30 this morning, George went out to warm up his car. It snowed 6 inches yesterday, and it was 19 degrees out. He waded through the powder in the driveway and tried to open the door. He discovered that the car door was completely frozen shut. In haste, because he was freezing quickly in the wind, he went around and tried the other 3 doors. All of them were sealed tight. This has never happened to him before. After George waded back through the drift and into the warm house, he woke his father up and asked what the trick was to get frozen car doors open. He told him to pour water on them. George asked, "Won't that just glaze them?" And before drifting off to sleep again, his father mumbled, "Pour and pull." So George grabbed a pitcher and filled it with water, thinking, "Pour and pull, pour and pull." Out through the snow to his frozen car he went. Once there, George grabbed the handle and poured the water over the jammed door jamb and pulled. Absolutely nothing happened. And now he had a freshly glazed car. It was quite pretty, actually. It glistened in the distant porch light. He realized that he had splashed water down his front, so now he was glazed as well. He tried pulling the handle with both hands, and in sheer frustration, he tried just staring stupidly at it as well. It wasn't budging. So now George thought that he would have to call in to work for a snow day. He didn't want to do that because he likes going to work, and he likes getting paid for going to work. But he figured his day was blown. He thought maybe he could come out at the top of every hour and try again. Then a new idea dawned on him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He thought this was a good idea. It might just work. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and pushed a button on his keychain, and bam! All 4 doors unlocked. Exercise 8. It may seem odd to classify honesty as a form of competitive behavior, but if elected officials believe that they will be punished for scandal, then they may refrain from ethically questionable behavior for the sake of retaining their positions. The idea that politicians will behave honestly to avoid electoral punishment relies on the idea that the electoral consequence of being caught in an act of corruption outweighs the electoral benefit of that corrupt act. They might abuse their positions for personal gain. For example, steering government contracts to businesses in which the official, her friends, or her family hold stock is a clear violation of the public interest for purely personal gain. Other forms of corrupt behavior might be specifically aimed at re-election. If elected officials exchange campaign contributions for policy favors, they do so based on the belief that accepting the contributions will increase their probabilities of being re-elected. Thus, the idea that politicians behave honestly to win elections ignores the fact that sometimes dishonesty can help officials win re-election. Exercise 9. The more you study language strategies, the more impressed you get at what a hugely flexible and variable set of behaviors we have learned. But you also need to remember that it is the social contexts, behaviors, and consequences that are doing all the hard work of making things actually happen, not the words themselves. In the dark alley, you probably have little in the way of social power, no reciprocities or history of resource reciprocity with the person confronting you to make your words actually do something. Your words will fall on deaf ears. Remember that words themselves have no power, just your social contexts of resources and reciprocities. If you noticed that the person was a second cousin of yours, that would be different. You now have historical reciprocities in your social relationships to give more power to your words, to change the person's behavior. But the problem with strangers in a dark alley is that they have no reason to do what you say. Exercise 10. The medicine effect has undoubtedly contributed to our evolutionary success. For example, Some of the most bitter-tasting plants in nature not only contain nutrients, they also provide valuable medicines. Thus, in order for humans to tolerate the bitterness of these medicines, they had to adopt ways of learning to overcome, rather to like, the tastes of these plants. By doing so, humans were able to develop a strategy that uses a basic law of effect. A behavior, such as consuming bitter-tasting plants, followed by positive consequences, such as recuperation from illness, will increase the probability of the behavior, and therefore the probability of consuming these medicinal plants again when seeking to recover from illness. This is a simple and very effective biological strategy. Behave in the world to seek positive consequences and avoid negative ones. How does our biology accomplish this? It shifts our preferences, i.e. our liking, toward those things that produce positive consequences, even if that requires liking the bitter taste of medicinal plants. After experiencing the healing properties of some bitter-tasting plants, humans learn to embrace their bitterness, leading to their evolutionary success. Exercise 11. There are several theories about the way the pyramids were built. In recent years, many scholars have dismissed earlier ideas that the pyramids were constructed using slave labor, although some still adhere to that theory. Many of today's Egyptologists, including Dr. Sahi Hawass, formerly the director of excavations at Giza, believe that the pyramids at Giza were built using a crew of about 20,000 to 30,000 men, who were mostly skilled laborers. Hawass and others believe that instead of being forced into service by slavery or through a feudal labor system, people willingly participated in the construction projects. A pharaoh's success in the afterlife was directly related to a worker's own prosperity. Thus, a worker's participation affected his life and afterlife. In that way, scholars view the pyramid building as something more similar to a public works campaign, embedded with religious significance, not as a punitive occupation for dissatisfied slaves. Exercises 12 through 14. There once was a king who was frequently visited by a pious companion. Whenever the companion visited the king, he would say, "Treat the good doer with good, and don't treat the evildoer with evil, for his evil will be sufficient for him." The king was very impressed with this man's wise words. Another man envied the companion for his good relationship with the king, so he devised an evil plan. He went to the king and told him that his companion had been telling everyone that the king had very bad breath. The king asked him how he could prove that. The envious man told the king to watch the companion during his next visit. He said that he would put his hand over his face to keep the smell away. On the day the companion was to pay the king a visit, the envious man invited him over for dinner. He put a lot of garlic in the food. When the companion visited the king, he put his hand over his nose and mouth so the king would not smell the garlic on his breath. The king believed the envious man. He wrote a letter and told the companion to take it to his administrators. The only time the king wrote a letter was when he intended to reward someone. However, on this occasion, he instructed his administrators to send the man who brought them the letter to prison. The companion was on his way to the administrators when the envious man asked what he was holding in his hand. The companion told him it was a letter from the king. The envious man asked him to hand over the letter as payment for the dinner. The companion handed the letter over to him. The envious man went to the administrators, and they put him in jail. The next day the king was surprised to see the companion visiting him as usual. The companion told him that the envious man took the letter away from him as he was delivering it to the administrators. The king asked him if he had been telling people that he had bad breath, and if not, why he had covered his mouth and nose. The companion told him about the garlic-infused food that the envious man served him. The king thought to himself, "Indeed, the evil of the evildoer is sufficient for him."